The Memoirs of Reverend David Brainerd, Chapter 10. General Remarks on the Work of Grace at Crossweek Sun, continued. Introduction. Method of learning the Indian language. Method of instructing the Indians. Difficulties in the way in converting them to Christianity. Attestation of neighboring ministers, elders, and deacons to the display of divine grace at Crossweek Sun. Quote, I should have concluded what I had at present to offer upon the affairs respecting my mission, with the preceding account of the money collected and expended for the religious interests of the Indians, but that I have not long since received from the Reverend President of the Correspondence the copy of a letter directed to him from the Honorable Society Propagating Christian Knowledge, dated Edinburgh, March 21, 1745, wherein I find it is expressly enjoined upon their missionaries, quote, that they give an exact account of the methods they make use of for instructing themselves in the Indian language, and what progress they have already made in it, of what methods they are now taking to instruct the Indians in the principles of their holy religion, and particularly of the difficulties that have already met with, and of the methods they make use of for surmounting the same, unquote. As to the two former of these particulars, I trust that what I have already noted in my communication from time to time might have been in good measure satisfactory to the Honorable Society, and had they arrived safely and seasonably, which I am sensibly they have not in general done, by reason of their falling into the hands of the enemy, although I have been at the pains of sending 2 copies of each. For more than 2 years past, at least one might miscarriage in the passage. With relation to the latter of these particulars, I have purposely omitted saying anything considerable, and that for these 2 reasons. First, because I could not oftentimes give any tolerable account of the difficulties which I met with in my work, without speaking somewhat particularly of the cases of them, and the circumstances conducing to them, which would necessarily have rendered my journals very tedious. Besides, some of the causes of my difficulties I thought more fit to be concealed than divulged. Secondly, because I thought that a frequent mention of the difficulties attending my work might appear an unbecoming complaint under my burdens, or as if I would rather be thought to be endowed with a singular measure of self-denial, consistency, and holy resolution to meet and confront so many difficulties, and yet to hold on and go forward amidst them all. But since the Honorable Society are pleased to require a more exact, particular account of these things, I shall cheerfully endeavor something for their satisfaction in relation to each of these particulars, although with regard to the latter I am ready to say, infidum jubis renivar de lorem. That's infandum hyphen jubesrenovare DELOREM. Excuse me. Section 1. Method of learning the Indian language. The most successful method which I have taken for instructing myself in any of the Indian languages is to translate English discourses by the help of an interpreter or 2 into their language, as near verbatim as the sense will admit of, and to observe strictly how they use words and what construction they will bear in various cases, and thus to gain some acquaintance with the roots from whence particular words proceed, and to see how they are thence varied and diversified. But here occurs a very great difficulty, for the interpreters being unlearned and unacquainted with the rules of language, it is impossible sometimes to know by them what part of speech some particular word is of, whether noun, verb, or participle. For they seem to use participles sometimes where we should use nouns, and sometimes where we should use verbs in the English language. But I have, notwithstanding many difficulties, gained some acquaintance with the grounds of the Delaware language, and have learned most of the defects in it, so that I know what English words can and what cannot be translated into it. I have also gained some acquaintance with the particular phraseologies, as well as peculiarities of the language, one of which I cannot but mention. This language does not admit of their speaking any word denoting relation, such as father, son, etc. Absolutely, that is, without prefixing a pronoun possessive to it, such as my, thy, his, etc. Hence, they cannot be baptized in their own language in the name of the Father and the Son, etc. But they may be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ and his Father, etc. I have gained so much knowledge of their language that I can understand a considerable part of what they say, when they discourse upon divine things, and am frequently able to correct my interpreter if he mistakes my sense. But I can do nothing to any purpose at speaking the language myself. As an apology for this defect, I must renew or rather enlarge my former complaint, viz., that while so much of my time is necessarily consumed in journeying, while I am obliged to ride 4,000 miles a year, as I have done in the year past, I can have little left for any of my necessary studies, and consequently for the study of the English or the Indian languages. That I may venture to say is the great, if not the only reason why the Delaware language is not familiar to me before this time. It is impossible that I should ever be able to speak it without close application, for which in present I see no prospect of having time. To preach in catechism frequently, to converse privately with persons who need so much instruction and direction as these poor Indians do, to take care of all their secular affairs as if they were a company of children, to write about frequently in order to procure collections for the support of the school, and for their help and benefit in other respects, to hear and decide all the petty differences which arise among any of them, and to have the constant oversight and management of all their affairs of every kind, must needs engross most of my time, and leave me little for application to the study of the Indian languages. Where I add to this the time that is necessarily consumed upon my diary, I must say I have little to spare for other business. I have not, as was observed before, sent to the Honorable Society less than 2 copies of every journal, for more than 2 years past, most of which, I suppose, have been taken by the French in their passage. A 3rd copy I have constantly kept by me, lest the others should miscarriage. This has caused me not a little labor, and so straightens me for the time, when I have been at liberty from other business and had opportunity to sit down to write, which is but rare, that I have been obliged to write 12 and 13 hours in a day, till my spirits have been extremely wasted and my life almost spent to get these writings accomplished. After all, after diligent application to the various parts of my work, and after the most industrious improvement of time, of which I am capable both early and late, I cannot oftentimes possibly gain 2 hours in a week for reading, or any other studies, unless just for what appears of absolute necessity for the present. Frequently, when I attempt to redeem time by sparing it out of my sleeping hours, I am by that means thrown under bodily indisposition, and rendered fit for nothing. This is truly my present state, and is like to be so, for aught I can see, unless I can procure an assistant in my work, or quit my present business. Although I have not made that proficiency which I could wish to have made in learning the Indian languages, yet I have used all endeavors to instruct them in the English tongue, which perhaps will be more advantageous to the Christian interest among them than if I should preach their own language, for that is very defective, as I shall hereafter observe, so that many things cannot be communicated to them without introducing English terms. Besides, they can have no books translated into their language without great difficulty and expense. And if still accustomed to their own language only, they would have no advantage of hearing other ministers occasionally or in my absence, so that to my having a perfect acquiescence with the Indian language would be of no great importance with regard to this congregation of Indians in New Jersey, although it might be of great service to me in treating with the Indians elsewhere. Section 2. Method of instructing the Indians. The method which I am taking to instruct the Indians in the principles of our holy religion are to preach or open and improve some particular points of doctrine, to expound particular paragraphs or sometimes whole chapters of God's Word to them, to give historical relations from Scripture of the most material and remarkable occurrences relating to the Church of God from the beginning, and frequently to catechism them upon the principles of Christianity. The latter of these methods of instructing I manage in a twofold manner. I sometimes catechism systematically, proposing questions agreeable to the Assembly's shorter catechism. This I have carried to a considerable length. At other times I catechism upon any important subject which I think difficult to them. Sometimes, when I have discoursed upon some particular point and made it as plain and familiar to them as I can, I then catechism them upon the most material branches of my discourse, to see whether they had a thorough understanding of it. But as I have catechism chiefly in a systematic form, I shall here give some specimen of the method I make use of in it, as well as the priority and justness of my people's answers to the questions proposed to them. Questions. Upon the benefits believers receive from Christ at death. Question. I have shown you that the children of God receive a great many good things from Christ while they live. Now, have they any more to receive when they come to death? Answer. Yes. Are the children of God made perfectly free from sin? Answer. Yes. Do you think they will never more be troubled with vain, foolish, and wicked thoughts? Answer. No, never at all. Question. Will they not then be like the good angels I have so often told you of? Answer. Yes. Question. Do you call this a great mercy to be freed from all sin? Answer. Yes. Do all God's children count it so? Yes, all of them. Do you think this is what they should ask for above all things, if God should say to them, ask what you will, and it shall be done for you? Oh yes, be sure this is what they want. You say the souls of God's people at death are made perfectly free from sin. Where do they go then? They go and live with Jesus Christ. Does Christ show them more respect and honor and make them more happy than we can possibly think in this world? Answer. Yes. Footnote to this question. The only way I have expressed their entering into glory, or being glorified, there being no word in the English language answering to that general term. End of the footnote. Do they go immediately to live with Christ in heaven as soon as their bodies are dead, or do they tarry somewhere else a while? They go immediately to Christ. Does Christ take any care of the bodies of his people when they are dead and their souls gone to heaven, or does he forget them? Answer. He takes care of them. These questions were all answered with surprising readiness and without once missing, as I remember. In answering several of them, which respected deliverance from sin, they were much affected and melted with the hopes of that happy state. Questions upon the benefits which believers receive from Christ at the resurrection. Question. You see, I have already shown you what good things Christ gives his good people while they live, and when they come to die. Now, will he raise your bodies, the bodies of others, to life again at the last day? Answer. Yes, they shall all be raised. Question. Shall they then have the same bodies they have now? Answer. Yes. Will their bodies then be weak? Will they feel cold, hunger, thirst, and weariness as they do now? No, none of these things. Will their bodies ever die any more after they are raised to life? No. Will their souls and bodies be joined together again? Yes. Will God's people be more happy then than they were while their bodies were asleep? Yes. Question. Will Christ then own these to be his people before all the world? Answer. Yes. Question. But God's people find so much sin in themselves that they are so often ashamed of themselves. And will not Christ be ashamed to own such for his friends at that day? Answer. No. He never will be ashamed of them. Will Christ then show all the world that he has put away these people's sins, and that he looks upon them as if they had never sinned at all? Yes. Footnote. The only way I have to express their being openly acquitted. In like manner, when I speak of justification, I have no other way but to call it God's looking upon us as good creatures. End of the footnote. Question. Will he look upon them as if they had never sinned for the sake of any good things they had done themselves, or for the sake of his righteousness accounted to them as if it was theirs? Answer. For the sake of his righteousness counted to them, not for their own goodness. Question. Will God's children then be as happy as they can desire to be? Answer. Yes. Question. The children of God, while in this world, can but now and then draw near to him, and they are ready to think they can never have enough of God and Christ. But will they have enough there as much as they can desire? Answer. Oh yes, enough, enough. Will the children of God love him then as much as they desire? Will they find nothing to hinder their love from going to him? Nothing at all. They shall love him as much as they desire. Will they never be weary of God and Christ and the pleasures of heaven, so as we are weary of our friends and enjoyments here, after we have been placed with them a while? Answer. No, never. Question. Could God's people be happy if they knew God loved them, and yet felt at the same time that they could not love and honor him? Answer. No, no. Will this then make God's people perfectly happy to love God above all, to honor him continually, and to feel his love to them? Yes. And will this happiness last forever? Yes, forever, forever. These questions, like the former, were answered without hesitation or missing, as I remember, in any one incident. Questions upon the duty which God requires of men. Question. Has God let us know anything of his will, or what he would have us to do to please him? Answer. Yes. Question. And does he require us to do his will and to please him? Answer. Yes. Question. Is it right that God should require this of us? Has he any business to command us as a father does his children? Answer. Yes. Why is it right that God should command us to do what he pleases? Because he made us and gives us all our good things. Question. Does God require us to do anything that will hurt us and take away our comfort and happiness? Answer. No. But God requires sinners to repent and be sorry for their sins, and to have their hearts broken. Now, does not this hurt them and take away their comfort, to be made sorry and to have their hearts broken? Answer. No, it does them good. Does God teach man his will at first by writing it down in a book, or does he put it into their heart and teach them without a book what is right? Answer. He put it into his heart and made him know what he should do. Has God since that time write down his will in a book? Yes. Has God written his whole will in his book? Has he there told us all that he would have us believe and do? Yes. What need was there of this book, if God at first put his will into the heart of man and made him feel what he should do? There was need of it because we have sinned and made our hearts blind. Question. And has God written down the same things in his book that he at first put into the heart of man? Answer, yes. In this manner I endeavored to adapt my instructions to the capacities of my people, although they may perhaps seem strange to others who have never experienced the difficulty of the work. These of which I have given an account are the methods I am from time to time pursuing in order to instruct them in the principles of Christianity. I think I may say it is my great concern that these instructions be given them in such a manner that they may not only be doctrinally taught, but duly affected thereby, that divine truths may come to them, quote, not in word only, but in power and in the Holy Ghost, unquote, and be received, quote, not as the word of man, unquote. Section 2. Difficulties attending the Christianizing of the Indians. First difficulty, the rooted aversion to Christianity that generally prevails among them. I shall now attempt something with relation to the last particular required by the Honorable Society in their letter, viz., to give some account of the difficulties I have already met with in my work, and the methods I make use of for surmounting the same. Number 1. I have met with great difficulty in my work among these Indians from the rooted aversion to Christianity which generally prevails among them. They are not only brutishly stupid and ignorant of divine things, but many of them are obstinately set against Christianity, and seem to abhor even the Christian name. This aversion to Christianity arises partly from the view of the immorality and vicious behavior of many who are called Christians. They observe that horrid wickedness in nominal Christians, which the light of nature condemns in themselves, and not having distinguishing views of things, are ready to look upon all the white people alike, and to condemn them alike, for the abominable practices of some. Hence, when I have attempted to treat with them about Christianity, they have frequently objected the scandalous practices of Christians. They have observed to me that the white people lie, defraud, steal, and drink worse than the Indians, that they have taught the Indians these things, especially the latter of them, who before the coming of the English knew of no such thing as strong drink, that the English have by these means made them quarrel and kill one another, and in a word brought them to the practice of all those vices which now prevail among them, so that they are now vastly more vicious as well as much more miserable than they were before the coming of the white people into the country. These and such like objections they frequently make against Christianity, which are not easily answered to their satisfaction, many of them being facts too notoriously true. The only way I have to take in order to surmount this difficulty is to distinguish between nominal and real Christians, and to show them that the ill conduct of many of the former proceeds not from their being Christians, but from their being Christians only in name and not in heart. To this it has sometimes been objected that if all those who will cheat the Indians are Christians only in name, there are but few left in the country to be Christians in heart. This and many other of the remarks they pass on upon the white people, and their miscarriages I am forced to own, and cannot but grant that many nominal Christians are more abominably wicked than the Indians. But then I attempt to show them that there are some who feel the power of Christianity, and that these are not so. I ask them when they ever saw me guilty of the vices of which they complain, and with which they charge the Christians in general. But still the great difficulty is that the people who live back in the country nearest to them, and the traders who go among them, are generally the most irreligious and vicious sort, and the conduct of one or two persons, be it never so exemplary, is not sufficient to counterbalance the vicious behavior of so many of the same denomination, and so to recommend Christianity to pagans. Another thing which serves to make them more adverse to Christianity is a fear of being enslaved. They are perhaps some of the most jealous people living, and extremely adverse to a state of servitude, and hence are always afraid of some design forming against them. Besides, they seem to have no sentiments of generosity, but benevolence and goodness. If anything be proposed to them as being for their good, they are ready rather to suspect that there is at bottom some design forming against them, then that such proposals flow from goodwill to them, and a desire of their welfare. Hence, when I have attempted to recommend Christianity to their acceptance, they have sometimes objected that the white people have come among them, have cheated them out of their lands, and driven them back to the mountains from the pleasant places they used to enjoy by the seaside, that therefore they have no reason to think that the white people are now seeking their welfare, but rather that they have sent me out to draw them together under a pretense of kindness to them, that they may have an opportunity to make slaves of them as they do of the poor Negroes, or else to ship them on board their vessels and make them fight with their enemies. Thus they have oftentimes construed all the kindness I could show them and the hardships I have endured in order to treat with them about Christianity. He never would, say they, take all this pains to do us good. He must have some wicked design to hurt us some way or other. To give them assurance of the contrary is not an easy matter, while there are so many who, agreeable to their apprehension, are only seeking their own, not the good of others. To remove this difficulty, I inform them that I am not sent out among them by those persons in these providences who they suppose have cheated them out of their lands, but by pious people at a great distance, who never had an inch of their lands, nor ever thought of doing them any hurt. But here will arise so many frivolous and impertinent questions that it would tire one's patience and wear out one's spirits to hear them, such as, but why did not these good people send you to teach us before, while we had our lands down by the seaside? If they had sent you then, we should likely have heard you and turned Christians. The poor creatures, still imagining that I should be much beholden to them, in case they would hearken to Christianity, and insinuating that this was a favor they could not now be so good as to show me, seeing they had received so many injuries from the white people. Among spring of aversion to Christianity in the Indians is their strong attachment to their religious notions, if they may be called religious, and the early prejudices which they have imbibed in favor of their own frantic and ridiculous kind of worship. What their notions of God are in their pagan state is hard precisely to determine. I have taken much pains to inquire of my Christian people whether they, before their acquaintance with Christianity, imagined that there was a plurality of great invisible powers, or whether they supposed but one such being, and worshipped him in a variety of forms and shapes, but cannot learn anything of them so distinct as to be fully satisfied upon the point. Their notions in that state were so prodigiously dark and confused that they seemed not to know what they thought themselves. But so far as I can learn, they had a notion of a plurality of invisible deities and paid some kind of homage to them precociously under a great variety of forms and shapes. It is certain that those who yet remain pagans pay some kind of superstitious reverence to beasts, birds, fishes, and even reptiles. That is, some to one kind of animal and some to another. And their promiscuity of worship them is unbelievable. They do not indeed suppose a divine power essential to or adhering in these creatures, but that some invisible being, I cannot learn that it is always one such being only, but diverses, not distinguished from each other, but certain names, but only nominal, communicate to those animals a great power, either one or the other of them, just as it happens, or perhaps sometimes all of them, and so make these creatures the immediate authors of good to certain persons. When such a creature becomes sacred to the person to whom he is supposed to be the immediate author of good, and through him they must worship the invisible powers, though to others he is no more than another creature. Perhaps another animal is looked upon to be the immediate author of good to another, and consequently he must worship the invisible powers in that animal. I have known a pagan burn fine tobacco for incense, in order to appease the anger of that invisible power, which he supposed presided over rattlesnakes, because one of these animals was killed by another Indian near his house. After the strictest inquiry respecting their notions of the deity, I find that in ancient times, before the coming of the white people, some supposed that there were 4 invisible powers, who presided over the 4 corners of the earth. Others imagined the sun to be the only deity, and that all things were made by him. Others, at the same time, have a confused notion of a certain body or fountain of deity, somewhat like the anima mundi, so frequently mentioned by the more learned ancient heathens, diffusing itself into various animals and even to inanimate things, making them the immediate authors of good to certain persons, as being observed with respect to various supposed deities. But after the coming of the white people, they seemed to suppose there were 3 deities, and 3 only, because they saw people of 3 different kinds of complexion, viz., English, Negroes, and Indians. It is a notion pretty generally prevailing among them that it was not the same God made them, who made us, but that they were made after the white people, which further shows that they imagine a plurality of divine powers. I fancy that they suppose their God gained some special skill by seeing the white people made, and so made them better, for it is certain they look upon themselves and their method of living, which they say their God expressly prescribed for them, vastly preferable to the white people and their method. Hence they will frequently sit and laugh at the whites, as being good for nothing else but to plow and fatigue themselves with hard labor, while they enjoy the satisfaction of stretching themselves on the ground and sleeping as much as they please, and have no other trouble but now and then to chase the deer, which is often attended with pleasure rather than pain. Hence, by the way, many of them look upon it to be as disgraceful for them to become Christians as it would be esteemed among Christians for any to become pagans. They suppose our religion will do well enough for us because prescribed by our God, yet it is no way proper for them because not of the same make and original. This they have sometimes offered as a reason why they did not incline to hearken to Christianity. They seem to have some confused notion about a future state of existence, and many of them imagine that the Chikung, in example, the shadow, or what survives the body, will at death go southward, and in an unknown but curious place will enjoy some kind of happiness, such as hunting, feasting, dancing, and the like. What they suppose will contribute much to their happiness in that state is that they shall never be weary of those entertainments. It seems by this notion of their going southward to obtain happiness as if they had their course into these parts of the world from some very cold climate, and found further they went southward the more comfortable they were, and thence concluded that perfect happiness was to be found further towards the same point. They seem to have some faint and glimmering notion about rewards and punishments, or at least happiness and misery in a future state. That is, some with whom I have conversed, though others seem to know of no such thing. Those who suppose this seem to imagine that most will be happy, and that those who are not so will be punished only with privation, being only excluded the walls of that good world where happy souls shall dwell. These rewards and punishments they suppose to depend entirely upon their conduct with relation to the duties of the second table, in example, their behavior towards mankind, and seem, so far as I can see, not to imagine that they have any reference to their religious notions or practices, or anything that relates to the worship of God. I remember I once consulted a very ancient but intelligent Indian upon this point for my own satisfaction, and asked him whether the Indians of old time had supposed there was anything of the man that would survive the body. He replied, yes. I asked him where he supposed its abode would be. He replied it would go southward. I asked him further whether it would be happy there. He answered, after considerable pause, that the souls of good folks would be happy, and the souls of bad folks miserable. I then asked him, whom he called bad folks. His answer, as I remember, was, "Those who lie, steal, quarrel with their neighbors, are unkind to their friends, and especially to aged parents, and in a word, such are a plague to mankind." These were his bad folks, but not a word was said about their neglect of divine worship and their badness in that respect. They have indeed some kind of religious worship, are frequently offering sacrifices to some supposed invisible powers, and are very ready to impute their calamities in the present world to the neglect of these sacrifices. But there is no apparency of reverence and devotion to the homage which they pay them. And what they do of this nature seems to be done only to appease the supposed anger of their deities, to engage them to be placable to themselves and do them no hurt, or at most only to invite these powers to succeed them in their enterprises they are engaged in respecting the present life, so that in offering these sacrifices they seem to have no reference to a future state, but only to present comfort. This is the account my interpreter always gives me of this matter. They sacrifice, says he, that they may have success in hunting and other affairs, and that sickness and other calamities may not befall them, which they fear in the present world in case of neglect. But they do not suppose God will ever punish them in the coming world for neglecting to sacrifice. Indeed, they seem to imagine that those whom they call bad folks are excluded from the company of good people in that state, not so much because God remembers and is determined to punish them for their sins of any kind, either immediately against himself or their neighbor, as because they would be a plague to society, and would render others unhappy if admitted to dwell with them, so that they are excluded rather of necessity than by God acting as a righteous judge. They give much heed to dreams, because they suppose these invisible powers give them directions at some times about certain affairs, and sometimes inform them what animal they would choose to be worshipped in. They are likewise much attached to the traditions and fabulous notions of their fathers, who have informed them of diverse miracles that were anciently wrought among the Indians, which they firmly believe and thence look upon their ancestors to have been the best of men. They also mention some wonderful things which they say have happened since the memory of some who are now living. One, I remember, affirmed to me that himself had once been dead 4 days, that most of his friends in that time were gathered together to his funeral, and that he should have been burned, but that some of his relations at a great distance, who were sent for upon the occasion, were not arrived, before whose coming he came to life again. In this time, he says, he went to the place where the sun rises, imagining the earth to be a plain, and directly over that place, at a great height in the air, he was admitted, he says, into a great house, which he supposes was several miles in length, and saw many wonderful things, too tedious as well as ridiculous to mention. Another person, a woman, whom I have not seen, but of whom I have been credibly informed by the Indians, declared that she was dead several days, and that her soul went southward, and feasted and danced with the happy spirits, and that she found all things exactly agreeable to the Indian notions of a future state. To these superstitious notions and traditions, and to this ridiculous worship, they are extremely attached, and the prejudices which they have imbibed in favor of these things render them not a little adverse to the doctrines of Christianity. Some of them have told me, when I have endeavored to instruct them, quote, that their fathers had taught them already, and that they did not want to learn now, unquote. It will be too tedious to give any considerable account of the methods I make use of for surmounting this difficulty. I will just say I endeavor as much as possible to show them the inconsistency of their own notions, and so to confound them out of their own mouths. I must also say I have sometimes been almost nonplussed with them, and scarcely knew what to answer them, but never have been more perplexed with them than when they had pretended to yield to me as knowing more than they, and consequently have asked me numbers of impertinent and yet difficult questions as, how the Indians came first into this part of the world, away from all the white people, if what I say was true, viz., that the same God made them who made us, how the Indians became black, if they had the same original parents with the white people, and numbers more of the like nature. These things, I must say, have been not a little difficult and discouraging, especially when withal some of the Indians have appeared angry and malicious against Christianity. What further contributes to their aversion to Christianity is the influence which their powwows, conjurers and diviners, have upon them. These are a sort of persons who are supposed to have a power of foretelling future events, or recovering the sick, at least oftentimes of charming, enchanting, or poisoning persons to death by their magic divinations. Their spirits, in its various operations, seem to be a satanic imitation of the spirit of prophecy with which the Church in early ages was favored. Some of these diviners are endowed with the spirit of infancy, others in adult age. It seems not to depend upon their own will, nor to be acquired by any endeavors of the person who is the subject of it, although it is supposed to be given to children sometimes in consequence of some means which the parents use with them for that purpose, one of which is to make the child swallow a small living frog, after having performed some superstitious rite and ceremonies upon it. They are not under the influence of this spirit always alike, but it comes upon them at times. Those who are now endowed with it are accounted singularly favored. I have labored to gain some acquisitions with this affair of their conjuration, and have for that end consulted and inquired with the man mentioned in my diary on May 9th, who, since his conversion to Christianity, has endeavored to give me the best intelligence he could of this matter. But it seems to be such a mystery of iniquity that I cannot well understand it, and do not know oftentimes what ideas to affix to the terms he makes use of. So far as I can learn, he himself has not any clear notions of the thing. Now his spirit of divination is gone from him. However, the manner in which he says he obtained the spirit of divination was this. He was admitted into the presence of a great man, who informed him that he loved, pitied, and desired to do him good. It was not in this world that he saw the great man, but in a world above at a vast distance from this. The great man, he says, was clothed with the day, yea, with the brightest day he ever saw, a day of many years, yea, of everlasting countenance. This whole world, he says, was drawn upon him, so that in him the earth and all things in it might be seen. I asked him if rocks, mountains, and seas were drawn upon or appeared in him. He replied that everything that was beautiful and lovely in the earth was upon him, and might be seen by looking on him, as well as if one was on the earth to take a view of them there. By the side of the great man, he says, stood his shadow or spirit, for he used, spelled Chichung, the word they commonly use to express the part of the man which survives the body, which word properly signifies a shadow. This shadow, he says, was as lovely as the man himself, and filled all places, and was most agreeable as well as wonderful to him. Here, he says, he tarried some time, and was unspeakably entertained and delighted with a view of the great man, or his shadow or spirit, and of all things in him. What is most of all astonishing, he imagines all this to have passed before he was born. He never had been, he says, in this world at that time. What confirms him in the belief of this is that the great man told him that he must come down to earth, be born of such a woman, meet with such and such things, and in particular, that he should once in his life be guilty of murder. At this he was displeased, and told the great man he would never murder. But the great man replied, I have said it, and it shall be so. Which has accordingly happened. At this time, he says, the great man asked him what he would choose in life. He replied, first to be a hunter, and afterwards to be a powwow or diviner. Whereupon the great man told him he should have what he desired, and that his shadow should go along with him down to the earth and be with him forever. That was, he says, all this time no word spoken between them. The conference was not carried on by any human language, but they had a kind of mental intelligence of each other's thoughts, dispositions, and proposals. After this, he says, he saw the great man no more, but supposes he now came down to earth to be born. But the spirit or shadow of the great man still attended him, and ever after continued to appear him in dreams and other ways, until he felt the power of God's word upon his heart, since which it has entirely left him. The spirit, he says, used sometimes to direct him in dreams to go such a place and hunt, assuring him he should there meet with success, which accordingly proved so. When he had been there some time, the spirit would order him to another place, so that he had success in hunting, according to the great man's promise made to him at the time of his choosing this employment. There were some times when this spirit came upon him in a special manner, and he was full of what he saw in the great man. Then he says, he was all light, and not only light himself, but it was light all around him, so that he could see through men, and knew the thoughts of their hearts. These depths of Satan I leave to others to fathom or to dive into as they please, and do not pretend, for my own part, to know what ideas to affix to such terms, and cannot well guess what conceptions of things these creatures have at these times when they call themselves all light. But my interpreter tells me that he heard one of them tell a certain Indian the secret thoughts of his heart, which he had never divulged. The case was this: the Indian was bitten with the snake, and was in extreme pain with the bite. Whereupon the diviner, who was applied to for his recovery, told him that at such a time he had promised that the next deer he killed he would sacrifice it to some great power, but had broken his promise. Now, said he, that great power has ordered the snake to bite you for your neglect. The Indian confessed it was so, but said he had never told anybody of it. These things served to fix them down in their idolatry, and to make them believe that there is no safety to be expected, but by their continuing to offer such sacrifices. The influence which these powers have upon them, either through the esteem or fear they have of them, is no small hindrance to their embracing Christianity. To remove this difficulty, I have labored to show the Indians that these diviners have no power to recover the sick, when the God whom Christians serve has determined them for death, that the supposed great power who influences the diviners has himself no power in this case, and that, if they seem to recover any of their magic charms, they are only such as the God I preached to them has determined should recover, and who would have recovered without their conjuration. When I have apprehended them afraid of embracing Christianity, lest they should be enchanted and poisoned, I have endeavored to relieve their minds of this fear by asking them why their powwows did not enchant and poison me, seeing they had as much reason to hate me for preaching to them and desiring them to become Christians, as they could have to hate them in case they should actually become such, that they might have an evidence of the power and goodness of God engaged for the protection of Christians. I ventured to bid a challenge to all their powwows and great powers to do their worst on me first of all, and thus labored to tread down their influences. Many things further might be offered upon their head, but thus much may suffice for a representation of their aversion to and prejudice against Christianity, the springs of it, and the difficulties thence arise. End of chapter 10, part 1. There will be 2 parts to this due to its length. Being read by Peter John Parisi, also known as Brian Dean. All of my audios are not copyrighted. Please feel free to make as many copies as you desire to the glory of God.